Hello, Mukti. I have recently been away, spending time with lots of people I'm very fond of and doing various different things. Despite keeping up practice and having time alone during that time, I find myself very physically discombobulated and exhausted by the amount of contraction in my system on returning home. It begs the question for me of how possible is it to be in the world when doing deep practice that opens up and refines a system. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So, I have experienced some of what I believe this person is speaking about. It was a little bit hard for me to follow when the person says they were discombobulated and exhausted by the amount of contraction in their system upon returning home. I don't think that they meant that returning home caused contraction. I think they meant that that's what they brought home after all these activities. So it is true in my experience and with a lot of people I talk to, but not everyone, that as a person opens and gets a sense of this world that surrounds us and this sense of inner and outer um, reduces down to a kind of seamless presentation of the one moment, that some people's energy bodies kind of follow the direction of, I can't say for sure that it's just how one's spatial mind or imaginary mind maps this, but it could be that there's a direct tie in to how our spatial mapping mind senses this kind of boundless outer world that has no edge or boundary or limit, and how our energy body might map to that and become really open. It's quite possible that if a person has, let's say, a Kundalini awakening or a kind of shift out of a sense of egoic self, that their energy body might also become more unboundaried. And so it's not necessarily that one follows the other, that energetics follow the extrapolation of the spatial mind that thinks of things very globally and very vast and large. But I can tell you that when the mind is more still and it's spatially not orienting to vast and open or contracted and local or um, inside or outside, when the mind is just still and it's not tracking to all these things, that a lot of energetics tend to work themselves out more. And it does seem to me too that there's a kind of thickening of that stillness or that consciousness that is joined in stillness. It creates a kind of gravitas in one's energy field that is supported when one sits physically still in meditation and they let their consciousness return to that stillness. It's like when we get a good long dunk in stillness, we hold that charge of stillness. And then if we go into environments that are more chaotic or more just a frenetic, energetically speaking, there's more of a buffer in our aura, in our person, that holds that charge of stillness. So it's almost as if the more chaotic, frenetic energy encounters that stillness and shifts. It becomes more still or becomes more dissipated or diffuse. And so it can be very helpful to have deep meditation practices in stillness, which I personally have found are incredibly supported by longer meditation retreats. And that can also give someone a greater sense of their energy settling down into the lower pelvis, into the lower body, and give a person a greater sense of ballast that helps when going out into a more um, uh, energy active world. So that's what I found has been very, very helpful. But one thing that's very interesting to me about it, that's a bit of a shortcut, is that when you experience more fullness of that energy in the lower belly, they have the chubby Buddhas with the big bellies. I really feel that that's a depiction of an energetic gravitas, where the energy settles from the upper body, the thinking mind, and even to some extent the heart, and settles down, down, down into that bowl of the pelvis and fills the lower belly. There's a kind of oh, a kind of fullness there that that energetic gravitas is again a kind of ballast in the midst of that more frenetic energy. So those the shortcut. The shortcut is that when the energy collects in the lower belly, especially through sitting meditation, there's a there's a term for that kind of energy in Zen. They call it jiriki. It's like cultivating this jiriki energy is to cultivate this energy of gravitas that fills the lower center of the hara, or it's also called the lower dantian, but it's very close to the lower belly and fills out the belly. And so when there's this kind of jiriki energy, this ballast, and one experiences that, even when you don't experience it, you can just through your remembrance, you can call it forward more. And that's interesting to me. Because sometimes the thinking mind will say, "Oh, I haven't cultivated much Jiriki. There's not much present." But if you stop and really stop and sense that lower belly again, because the lower belly and the lower gateway has spent time in meditation where that Jiriki has been cultivated or become more full, if you stop and drop your attention into the lower belly, there's a way that it brings that past experience into remembrance, and it's also helps that jiriki come forward again. It also helps because your consciousness is dropped into that location and energy tends to follow our consciousness where we direct it. And so instead of our consciousness being really far out and in a kind of vast um, preference to being free and unboundaried and open, there can be a kind of drawing our consciousness down and in, which in turn draws our energy much more into the body. And it takes on a sense of gravitas and even that sense of jiriki, which is a kind of energy of gravity that collects and thickens and really kind of gathers in a type of life intelligence that enables more spontaneous action. And so people in the martial arts, they cultivate a lot of this, yeah, like Jiriki from the lower belly. And there's that more spontaneous expression that can inform their strikes or their movements to defend. For example, in Aikido, which is in large part, if not all part, defense. So so there's ways that we can shift our energetics. And I've also found personally that when I lift weights, and Adi gives this pointer a lot, or has throughout his years of teaching, when there's more physical kind of mass and solidity, the energy is also more anchored. and more housed in the physical body, and there's less sensitivity and a more robust ability to engage with the outer world and different dynamics and relationships. But there's often just a shift in taste for kind of mayhem and crazy making. And often people will feel just more of a leaning and preference towards spending time in quiet. And in large part, that's because there's usually this practical byproduct of being um, more attuned with the peace and serenity of the sense of consciousness when it abides within, that can become a preferred taste that people develop who've meditated for a while and given devotional their devotion and their sincerity to encountering stillness and quietude more consciously. It's just like anything that we give our attention to over and over again. It often, if it's a positive thing, it becomes a love. It becomes an appetite, an inclination that we lean toward.